Welcome to the Europe Direct Blanchardstown podcast. And today's podcast is part in a series we're doing marking the EU mental health strategy that was published a few months ago. And in today's podcast, we're going to be talking about mental health for students, and particularly students who are preparing exams. And as we know in Fingal libraries at the moment, it's September, the schools are back, and we're going to have all of our students coming in to do their studies, and you're of course most welcome to do so. And we hope that this podcast will be of particular help to you, and indeed any students in Ireland or elsewhere who are preparing exams. I think this will be very helpful. Now, I am joined by Amber Roche, a psychotherapist, and Amber has been with us before when we did our European Mental Health Week podcast, so we decided to continue on with this series. So, Amber, you're very welcome, and thanks for coming back.
Oh, hi, Barry, and thank you for having me back. I'm delighted to be here and to be able to have a chat with you and hopefully help some students along the way.
That's it. And our last two podcasts were really, really popular. They did really well. And we're going to kind of re-release them with this series as well, because as I said, I think they'll really go well together and help a lot of people. So as we said, we're talking about students today. And I mean, I think I certainly still have nightmares about the Leaving Cert.
Oh gosh, me too. Yeah, waking up in a sweat and thinking, oh no, I've done nothing. And yeah, it stays with us, doesn't it?
Years later. I told you just before we came on, I'm 44 tomorrow. And
happy birthday.
Thank you very much. And I still have that dream where it's the exam and you've prepared nothing. And it's usually in a subject you've never heard of. And
I know.
You know, to this day. And
that's it. And I think back in our day, well, you're a bit younger than me, Barry, but we didn't really have the tools to help us prepare. We didn't have the knowledge. And I can certainly say my own parents, as much as they tried, they just didn't know. And it was the mindset of, you know, get upstairs and get yourself studying, not knowing actually how you go about and prepare for it.
And I mean, that's true for mental health in general. I mean, thankfully, in recent years, we've become a lot more aware of a society as kind of how important mental health is. And I think, you know, parents are getting a better grip on that side of things. And you're right, it was nobody's fault. We just didn't have the knowledge back then.
Exactly. And it can be a really stressful time for parents as well.
That's it.
Hopefully, and in today's chat, we can help the parents prepare as well.
Because it is. It's a very stressful time for parents too, isn't it? I mean, and you know that personally, don't you?
Oh, I do. I've got one now who's preparing for her year 12 exams at the moment. So we're up to high dough. But I'm just helping her try and stay as calm as possible and just letting her know there's definitely different paths to the same goal.
Absolutely.
If you don't do great in the exams, there's always other ways around it.
That's a really important thing to say. Yeah, there's any in Ireland and other countries, there's always different pathways. And it's, you know, I've seen some of the most successful people I've seen actually may not have got the results they wanted in their leaving certificate or equivalent exam and ended up doing brilliantly and found their pathway. Yeah. So
yes, I mean, me being one of those people, Barry, I certainly I didn't know what I wanted to do when I left school. I had no idea. I discovered later on in life where I wanted to go and what I wanted to study. So there's no pressure really nowadays on people to know what they want to do when they finish school.
Yeah. Well, that's great progress. So just tell me a little about, I mean, you've told me a little bit about your personal experience there in you know, with exams and being a student or being the parent of a student. And tell us a little bit about your professional experience in that area.
Okay. So, Barry, I've worked at a college for several years counselling students, and the age range is 16 upwards. So, the students tend to present with a variety of problems. And I certainly see an increase in numbers towards the end of year, or
Right.
towards any kind of exams that are coming up. Um, and that can be the student who typically leaves everything until the last minute, and they're
Okay.
trying to cram everything in. Or we have the procrastinator who keeps putting everything off, and then they find themselves in a complete blind panic, and they
Okay.
just don't know where to start.
Well, I tell you, let's start with that because that's a really interesting one. The procrastination, and that's, I think, something we've all struggled with. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is?
Yes, well, I don't know if you've heard that saying, procrastination is the thief of time, and
Mm,
it certainly is. So essentially, procrastination is when we put something off. We know we have to do it, however, we keep pushing it out to a later date.
mm,
But when you procrastinate, you essentially substitute an important task or goal that you've committed yourself to with another activity that isn't a priority at the
okay.
time.
Yeah.
The
Isn't that the case when you're studying and suddenly everything else becomes more interesting?
Oh, of
Whether
course,
it be
yeah.
drawing a picture on the other page, or oh, I must tidy up that thing now, or and I mean, and I can tell you, I'm in college at the moment myself, so I know
Okay.
exactly how this feels. And like you'd think, oh, at 44, he must have it all figured out and he's studying all the time. Not at all. I struggle with exactly the same things as I did when I did my leaving certificate. So
Yeah,
I know
certainly.
exactly what you mean. Yeah.
And typically, people may start scrolling on the phone, and social media is one of
Yes.
the biggest distractions, or gaming.
Yeah.
You'll find, as you said, you'll find yourself doing anything other than the task at hand.
Absolutely.
So it's all diversionary things you do to take yourself further and further away from the goal. And it's essentially, it's really is a self-defeating behavior
Uh,
pattern.
and why do we do it? What's
Well, it's because we feel overwhelmed by something that we have to do. It can also be a form of self-sabotage, just a
right?
self-defeating behavior. It is essentially a behavior pattern, and it has a short-term gain. And that short-term gain effectively is to avoid the discomfort of having to face into something
Yeah.
that we find overwhelming. But
Mm.
it definitely has long-term negative effects, and
So
they
that's
far outweigh that
so it's
short-term gain.
okay. So it's kind of like an avoidance thing. Yeah. It's
It
like
is,
yeah,
it's an
you're
avoidance strategy. Yeah,
yeah, yeah, and we've all been there. I think something and it might not even be study. It could be anything. For example, I probably should have gone to the dentist weeks ago. I've got a chip in a tooth, but I'm kind of putting it off and putting it off because I don't really want to face it. So it's kind of a similar thing, isn't it? Uh,
absolutely. So if you looked at that about the short-term gain is effectively avoiding the perceived, maybe pain, threat
yeah,
of pain,
yeah,
about going to a dentist. But the long-term effects are that, you may experience more serious
yeah.
dental, you know, things going on.
Well, I promise you, Amber, as soon as I'm done with this podcast, I'll make an appointment
You'll
in the
be on
dentist.
to it.
Yeah, yeah.
Great.
Won't do what I normally do and wait till I'm banging my head off the wall in pain, like.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's it. That's what can happen.
So you mentioned there the negative consequences of procrastination. Could you
Mm,
expand on that a little bit?
okay. So often, the more you procrastinate, the more you might feel guilty or ashamed of your actions.
Mm,
You can begin to feel more anxious, and that's because the task seems to be getting worse or more overwhelming the longer you put it off. You may
mm,
feel despair, as the longer you don't do it, the more you think you can't tackle it, and the bigger the fear becomes in your head. People they'll often beat themselves up and become really self-critical as a result of their procrastination. And you know yourself, the more you put something off, the more the tasks pile up around you, the more
Yeah.
demands you have to meet, the more pressures you face. And deadlines generally don't change. And particularly when you look at exams, the exam date won't change.
Yeah.
But now the time that you have to prepare for it is less. So this then becomes more and more overwhelming.
Yeah.
We've all been there, Barry, to some extent.
Definitely.
It's not a good feeling. We end up having very negative thoughts about ourselves.
It kind of spirals then, because I think the longer you
spirals.
leave it, the more anxious you get,
The
because the
worse,
closer the
yeah.
deadline is getting. Yeah, absolutely.
The worse it becomes in our head then as well. We're becoming more and more anxious, so then we fear more what we need to do.
Yeah.
And what I like to say to people is, you need to do something that will look after your future self. So putting this off and off, is that looking after your future self? No, it's not.
Yeah.
But being prepared that's being kind to you. So that's a way to look at it as well.
Definitely.
How is this serving me?
Yeah, absolutely. And it can be hard to look at that bigger picture, can't it? Especially when you're stressed like that, it can be hard to step back and kind of see a little bit more into the future. And, it's, as you said, it's easy to get overwhelmed. So what are some tips that we can practice to overcome procrastination?
Okay. The first step really is recognizing this behavior, acknowledging that this is a behavior that you readily engage in. Understanding procrastination and using helpful self-talk to overcome procrastination is very important. So just being mindful of the words that you use towards yourself. And this goes for parents also.
Yeah.
Being overly critical or harsh, it won't improve the situation. So it's really about finding practical ways to stop putting things off and to start doing.
And can I just go back to what you said there about the self-talk? Because we spoke about this before in the last podcasts. Don't we often keep our harshest criticism for ourselves?
We do.
And that's something I think that can be very disruptive, especially when you're trying to prepare an exam like that. It's important to be kind to ourselves, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's watching that internal voice. We all have that inner critic and that inner dialogue. And it's just sometimes changing the words that we have for ourselves. Asking yourself, is that how I would speak to a friend? Is that how I would encourage a friend?
Yeah, and that's I often use that with people I know. I said, would you say that to me? Would you say that to a friend? Would you know what I mean? So why would you say it to yourself?
Yes,
and we've all been there.
We have. Yeah, and the voice that we have inside our head, it can often be automatic.
Yes. Yeah.
It's a voice maybe that we've internalized. We've experienced maybe harsh critics in our life, and then we internalize that voice.
Yeah.
But it's just being mindful of that, stepping back.
I think, and when we're mindful, then we can catch ourselves and maybe change that thought process. And it's about changing habits, isn't it?
It is, which lead then to different pathways in the brain.
Yeah.
Instead of those automatic habits, it's just stepping back and noticing, and that gives you the opportunity to change.
Okay, so there's our first step, being aware and the self-talk. So what else can we do?
Well, prioritize as well. That's really important. So the old to-do list.
Yep.
So getting out your piece of pen and paper or whatever works for you, but bearing in mind not to get too obsessed with writing the to-do list. So
that's me. Yeah.
So then that can become a distraction.
Yeah.
So it's just writing down a list of the tasks and the goals that you need to work on, putting them in order, from things that need to be done first and foremost, then what's next, and what can be done later down the track. That way you'll know where to start, not based on what you feel like doing, but based instead on what's most urgent and what's most important on the to-do list. And the next step really in that is to grade each task. So what we mean by grade is to break the task into smaller, more manageable chunks that are involved in achieving the main task. This works really well in the sense that if it's a large task and you don't know where to start, grading it into its component steps just makes it seem less overwhelming.
Yeah. So take that big, if I'm studying something in history or something, I mean, I'm studying World War One. So rather than trying, oh God, I have to learn everything I need to know about that, I say, well, let's start with I need to know about the causes. Then I need to know about the different countries involved. Then I need to know about, what was the thing that sparked it off. So you kind of break it down into your different sections, as you say.
Breaking
it feels
it down.
a little bit less overwhelming.
Yes, I remember myself when I started studying, the thought of having to go through 4 years, it felt really overwhelming for me. And I thought to myself, oh, I'm not going to be able to do this. There's no way. The time when I started off studying, Barry, I had 2 very young children. One of them actually was a newborn.
Wow.
So I thought, how am I going to get through this? And how I managed it was just taking it down to semester per semester. Not looking at the 4 years, but just one term at a time, 1 week at a time.
Yeah.
Not fast futurizing too much, not fast forwarding. That really helped me. And I looked at it almost, I gave myself the analogy of a patchwork quilt. The end was to have this beautiful quilt, but I needed to have all these little patches sewn together, piece by piece. That would take time to give me the end result.
Yeah, I like that analogy. So just work on each patch at a time. And I think then as well, you get a sense of achievement then when you've completed the metaphorical patch, when you've completed each section, there's a sense of achievement. And I get what you're saying, because I'm in the middle of it right now myself. I'm where you were. I'm in college. I have a young child, and I try to do the same. So I've 2 semesters a year, they're 12 weeks each, and then I've 12 topics. So just get one topic a week, get to grips with that, and then move on. And by breaking it down like that, it definitely makes it feel more manageable, without a doubt.
When we become too overstressed and overwhelmed, our brain shuts down. We can't actually think. So we become, in a sense, irrational. There's no logic there. And that's when we start catastrophizing and just stressing out. All that negative self-talk comes back. So as you said, it's just so important to slow things down and to break them into just those little bite-sized chunks. And that's why when you're preparing for exams, the to-do list is really important.
Absolutely.
And it's just taking it one step at a time. There are a number of ways of approaching each step of a task or goal. And there's no way or no right way. It's to do what works for you.
Yeah, definitely. And everybody learns a bit differently as well.
We do. Yes.
And and what might work for me, what might not work for you. And that's okay. That's okay. I think for a long time, I think we tried to pigeonhole that everyone, this is the way it should be done. And that's how, but I think there's more of a recognition now that people learn in different ways. I mean, I'm sure you've heard of, is it Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences, where you've you know, some people are very strong on maths, others are good on language, others might learn in a more, you know, somebody like David Beckham would have high kinetic intelligence. So in
Yes.
terms, or a dancer would have high kinetic intelligence. There's natural intelligence, people who be very good at gardening or working with animals or that type of thing.
Mm.
Somebody like you being a therapist would have very good interpersonal and intrapersonal intelligence. So we all have different ways of learning, and it's about finding what works for you,
It
isn't it?
is, and recognizing our talents and our individuality.
Yeah.
I think also in schools at the moment where um, people or the system is now looking at individuals more than groups,
Yeah.
and recognizing that we all don't learn at the same pace. We're all different, and it's embracing everybody's talent. We all have something that we're good at.
Yeah.
And just because you're not good, let's say at maths or French or English or something,
Yeah.
it doesn't mean that you're a failure or that you're not going to be a success.
Absolutely.
It's about
Absolutely.
finding your niche.
Yeah. And we all have it,
We do. We do.
you know.
So something else maybe is if we look at some of these steps that we can approach and go through to just help us navigate our way through these tasks and goals. One of the things we can do is we can go for the worst first option.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's maybe knocking out the worst task first. So particularly if there's something you're dreading, get it over and done with first. Then all the other things you need to do, they'll seem easier after that.
Yeah.
So tackling the dreaded one, the
Yeah.
one that you don't want to do.
Also, when your mind is maybe at its freshest, to tackle that one. When you're
Yes,
less
yeah,
tired, you're, you know, maybe have a little bit more energy, that's the time to have a go at the one you're not so.
exactly. Yes. Another option is start doing a task that you like and that energizes you. Then without a break, just quickly switch into the task that you've been putting off. So this idea, it uses the motivation and momentum you get from the tasks you like to help you get through the tasks that you don't like.
Yeah. Yeah. And one isn't better than the other. One will work for one person, will work for
Yes.
another, or one might work for me on Monday, but I'll use the other one on Thursday, and that's fine. That's okay.
That's it. Yeah.
There's no
And
one right
this can
way.
be applied to, stuff around the house as
Yeah,
well.
absolutely. Absolutely. Excellent. So any more tips?
Yeah. And another really useful approach of getting started on tasks is to plan to spend just 5 minutes on the task. This is one
Okay.
that I particularly like.
Yeah, yeah.
It's such a small amount of time. You feel that you can tolerate just 5 minutes. At the end of the 5 minutes, reassess and see if you can spend another 5 minutes, let's say, on the task, and so on. You can decide to make the chunks of time a little bit larger. So you might go for 10 minutes or 15 minutes, if that seems more reasonable. But the whole idea around this is just to set a small amount of time to get started on a task.
Yeah.
At the end, you can go just another small amount of time or more or none.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you'd be surprised at how much you're able to extend your time once you get into it.
That's it. It's the start, as we say, the procrastination. And it's once you get started, you kind of find, well, I've done 5 minutes. Look, I might as well keep going for a bit more. And then before you know, I mean, you've heard, the term that a lot of people use now, the flow state. And you
Yes,
finally kind of hit that then, and you kind of
you're
you keep
getting
going,
into it. Yeah, that is it.
um,
This is something that I've addressed with my own mom. So she's decluttering her house out at the moment. So
okay.
she's been in that house for over 45 years.
Wow.
And feels completely overwhelmed at the idea
Yeah,
of
yeah.
tackling it and clearing it
Understandably,
out.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I've said to her, look, start with one locker, the bedside locker,
Mm-hmm. I said break the
and
tasks down, as you say.
break it down and give yourself a week, 10 minutes a day, just on that locker, that corner.
Mm.
And what happens then is, and she has said that to me, she got into the momentum of doing it. And then she cleared the locker out before she even knew it.
Yeah.
Which in turn gave her a sense of achievement.
Yes.
And a sense of, empowerment in that I can do it.
Yeah.
It's not that bad.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
It's our own thoughts about getting something done that usually stops us.
The thing that's really coming through here is half the battle is starting, isn't it? It really is.
Oh, yeah, it is.
That's coming through loud and clear. Yeah.
That's why I love that 5-minute approach. It's called the Pomodoro method. And
okay.
if you can look it up on YouTube and it'll go through it. But it's just simple. I like it.
Yeah, definitely. And it seems manageable. 5 minutes. We can all do 5 minutes.
5 minutes. We can all do 5 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, it's applying that to anything. It can even be exercise.
Yes. Yes. I've been there yesterday.
I'll do 5 minutes. That's it.
Yeah. Just to get started. Okay. So anything else on that?
Well, I think it's also really important to reward yourself. And part of approaching the tasks and goals is to plan rewards and to put in some enjoyment time. Funny enough, it's often the things we use to reward ourselves, like the phone or the social media or the gaming. They're the same things that distract us and get us procrastinating in the first place.
Yeah.
So the trick is to let these rewards be guilt-free by having pre-planned them and fitting them in around the work that needs to be done. So it's important just to put them into your schedule.
Yeah, and maybe I often use either, Google Home or Alexa or one of these and say, look, set a timer there for 15 minutes. I'm going to give myself 15 minutes to do my Instagram or my whatever, my scrolling or whatever it is I want to do. And when the bell rings, okay, we'll get back now.
Do it, off,
And as you say, guilt-free.
Guilt-free. That's what we need, guilt-free.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, that's some great. Any more tips before we finish up on that section?
That's really it. I think they're my top ones. So I hope that helps.
So I think we have being aware of how we feel and the procrastination, being aware of it. That's a big one. The self-talk we said is very important, to not be too harsh on ourselves. We spoke about breaking down the tasks into manageable, bite-sized things to do, rather than kind of seeing the whole thing together and getting overwhelmed by it. We looked at ways of getting started, like the worst first option, or starting with the task you like, or the 5-minute rule that we had there. You just get 5 minutes, and then the rewards. So there's a few
the rewards,
great things to kind of get over that procrastination, because that's as I said, once you get started, I think it's half the battle. So the next thing I want to move on to what are some of the common mental health issues that students face, especially in an exam year?
Okay, so the biggest one is stress, Barry. And let's face it, exams are stressful. And again, it's normalizing that stress. It is perfectly normal to feel stressed during the build-up to and during exams. And in life, when we face any major challenges or changes, it triggers the amygdala in the brain to feel anxious. And it's a natural biological occurrence.
Okay, I'm going to go back there. You used the word there, the amygdala. So for those of us not familiar with these terms, what is that?
Okay, so without going too technical, the amygdala, it's a region of the brain that is primarily associated with emotional processes. It's an almond-shaped structure, and it's located right next to the hippocampus.
Okay.
The amygdala is part of what's called the limbic system.
Right.
And it's the part of the brain that's most closely associated with fear, emotions, and motivation.
Okay.
So when you're stressed out or emotional, your limbic system is working overtime to help your body process your feelings.
Okay.
And because emotion and memory are so highly connected within the human brain, the limbic system also plays a part in memory and learning. Now, an advantage of this is if you can see that the anxiety before an exam can activate you to be in a hyper-focused state and to be more present and pumped up before an exam, this can potentially change the usual rhetoric around exams. So they're not all bad.
Yeah. So I mean, a certain amount of stress and is nearly necessary, isn't it? When we
It
all
is,
feel it,
yes.
or going into a job interview or anything like that, I think you need a little bit of, it gives you a little bit of adrenaline.
It certainly does, yes. And that if we can look at it from a different angle and see it as something positive,
Yeah.
it can change then our whole perception around
Yeah.
exams and stress.
So the right amount of stress isn't necessarily a bad thing. So
No,
don't stress about the stress. Basically. Yeah.
exactly. I like that. I think you
Yeah.
need a t-shirt with that on
Yeah.
it, Barry.
Yeah. So, to accept it's a normal part of the process, and it's nearly
It
a
is.
necessary part. It's
Yes, it is. We all need a certain amount of stress. Another thing that students bring in a lot is anxiety.
okay.
And much of the anxiety is around the thoughts that we create in our head. I like to call these our ant attacks.
Okay.
ANT, ANT being an acronym for automatic negative thoughts. So I'm sure you can relate to that.
Yeah,
We
without a
all
doubt.
fall into that trap of telling ourselves things that just isn't true. So we need to try and stop focusing on the ants.
Yes.
If you find yourself churning up the same thoughts, try and create an oppositional thought. An example might be, oh, I can't do this. I'm going to fail. How about instead challenging that thought instead of accepting it as a fact? So how about thinking, I've got this.
Yeah.
I can do this. I've got your back. You've got your own back.
Yeah.
And it can feel a little bit weird at first, but what this is essentially doing is it's interrupting that negative cycle. And in turn, that rewires those patterns in the brain. And it's to remember that thoughts precede our emotions.
Yeah. Yeah.
And often there's a pattern to such thoughts. And we call these unhelpful thinking styles. One of the things that I've noticed is that people use unhelpful thinking styles as an automatic habit.
Okay.
So
And
it's
that's the thing, is
something.
it's changing the habits, isn't it? We all do it.
It
You
is, yeah.
mentioned rewiring, and
Yes,
if you can kind of, I mean, the beauty is we're kind of near the beginning of the school year now. If you can get into those good habits early on of the
yes,
more positive self-talk, I mean, it'll really stand to you throughout the year, won't it?
it certainly will. And these these unhelpful thinking styles, quite often they happen out of our awareness.
Yeah.
However, when a person consistently and constantly uses some of these styles of thinking, they can often cause themselves a great deal of emotional
Yeah.
distress.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's really important to try to change your perspective. What other ways are there of viewing the situation? And you might say to yourself, again, like if I was given advice to someone I care about in this situation, what would I say? Or if I want to act in a certain way, how would I have to think differently?
Yeah. Yeah.
So they're just some of the techniques that you can use, Barry.
Yeah.
Again, some of the listeners might find them useful.
Definitely. And a bit later on, we might talk about some of the tools. Actually, well, let's say it now. I mean, are there, I mean, there's tools out there, aren't there? I mean, there's even apps and that can help. I mean, we've spoken before about the Insight app is very good, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. Insight Timer, it's a great app, and I use it quite a lot. So it can be useful. There are lots of meditations, there's lots of talks,
Yeah.
and most of it is free. You can subscribe if you want the more upgraded version. But I find it really, really useful. There's the other apps there's one called the Happy Feed.
Okay.
And it's a very simple app, and it's really about gratitude, and it encourages you to keep a gratitude journal and building gratitude into your life. That in turn, it trains your brain to focus more on the happy moments in life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Another good app is Headspace, and that's probably the most well-known apps on the market. And it's pretty easy to use. And again, it has lots of great guided meditations.
And I mean, you mentioned meditation can be a great way of dealing with this, can't it? I mean, mindfulness, and even I find like a 5-minute mindfulness meditation before getting studied can help kind of just clear the mind and bring you back to the present. So that can be a good tip. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy, like a
Yes.
body scan meditation or something like that, or just focusing on the breath for maybe 3 minutes to just kind of bring you back.
And yeah, on that Headspace app, they have a selection of meditations called Weathering the Storm.
Okay.
And they're really nice to listen to. Another good app is called Smiling Mind.
Right.
That's actually an Australian app.
Okay.
But it's hundreds of meditations, and they're suitable for almost any situation. And don't be intimidated by that word meditation. Really, when you break it down, it's just somebody talking you through something. They usually have a pretty nice voice, or there's some calming music, and it can be a friend to you.
Yeah.
So I'd encourage people to try it out, and
Definitely.
you can do a 3-minute one. It doesn't have to be anything huge.
Absolutely. And I'll put the links maybe to those underneath this podcast so people can kind of check them out. Because that's one great thing that certainly didn't exist when we did exams, is these apps didn't, I mean, there weren't even smartphones.
No.
So it's great that these tools are out there. I mean, we sometimes criticize smartphones and all that, but they can be very useful as well, can't they?
They can. And there's another app called Calm, which helps people if they're struggling to sleep.
Okay.
And that's actually something I wanted to touch on.
Yeah, well, let's go with that. Sleep.
Yeah. So the importance of sleep, and it may sound really obvious, but we do need to hear about the importance of sleep and how much we need sleep in order for the brain to function well.
Yeah.
We really need good quality sleep.
And how much sleep do we need, actually? I mean, there's often debate about that.
There is. They recommend between 7 to 8 hours, but I guess really the focus is on REM sleep. So when we sleep, there's 4 cycles to sleep.
Right.
But what's called REM sleep, or rapid eye movement, that's the part of sleep that we need to have in order to refresh the brain. And I know a lot of students that I speak to, they won't sleep. They're trying to cram in so much work at the last minute, or do these all-nighters.
Yes.
They don't get that sleep. So REM sleep, it's the stage of sleep where most of our dreaming occurs.
Okay.
And it's characterized by rapid eye movements. It plays a really important role in memory consolidation.
Yeah.
And that's why REM sleep is particularly important during exam time.
Yeah, and I've often told students about that in Blanchardstown Library, often, especially the night before the leaving cert. I'll say, you know, I often say at about 5 or 6 o'clock that evening, accept you're going to know everything you're going to know at that point.
Yeah.
And that the sleep you get is just as an important part of the study as the study itself, because that's when your brain, and correct me if I'm wrong, does your kind of organizing or its filing of that information away, ready to be retrieved.
It does. That's when the brain processes the new learnings and the motor skills from the day. And if you deprive yourself of REM sleep, it interferes with memory formation. And
Yeah.
without adequate sleep, your cognitive performance will decline and you may find yourself forgetting things. So that's when people face that blank. They
Yeah.
go into an exam and boom, they cannot remember anything.
Yeah.
And usually if you ask them, well, what was the quality of your sleep like last night? Or did you sleep?
Mm-hmm.
The answer is, I had a really bad sleep, or
Yeah.
I didn't sleep at
Sleep.
all. I've been up all night.
Yeah. And the other thing I'd say is, well, try not to get too dependent on those energy drinks. I see them every
Oh,
year coming in
yeah,
with these big cans. I won't mention any brands, but
I
coming in with
know.
cans of whatever. I did it myself, I could
Yeah,
admit.
full of sugar,
Yeah, not good.
crash and burn.
Yeah,
That's what's going to happen. You'll get a massive rush and then boom, burn. You'll
yeah,
just feel really sleepy and drained.
yeah.
So no, hydration's really important during exams.
Mm,
It's important all the time. So bring yourself in some water. If you can't stand the taste of water, add maybe some sugar-free cordial.
yeah,
Or maybe if you like, fizzy drinks, like a
yeah,
fizzy water with a cordial or some natural
yeah,
fruit juice squeezed into it. Um,
yeah.
but yeah, REM sleep is really important. Babies, they need about 8 hours of REM sleep.
Wow.
And then infants and children, they need plenty of REM sleep because the brain is still developing.
Mm.
By adulthood, we need an average of 2 hours of REM sleep per
Okay.
night.
So not just sleep in general,
Remember,
we're talking specifically REM sleep.
yes, and
Okay.
that's only one part of the sleep cycle,
Mm-hmm.
but it
Mm-hmm.
is the one that refreshes the brain.
Okay. Okay. And any other things that we need to consider in terms of tips or?
Yes, well, I suppose we should maybe look at diet, food.
Ah, yes.
Yes. So how do we fit? We need to eat in order to feed the brain. So it's really, really important to eat a decent breakfast on the day of the
Yes.
exam.
Yes. And a bag
Um,
of crisps is not a breakfast. Can I say
no,
at that
it
point?
won't cut it.
No.
No. And I know people can be really fussy about, what they eat, or
Mm,
some people can feel sick and nauseous,
yeah.
and the last thing that they want to do is eat. But just try and have something that contains protein.
Mm,
And this will stabilize the blood sugars, and that prevents that surge and crash. So if you look at protein, even a smoothie,
yeah.
getting in a really nice smoothie, maybe with some almond milk, some oat milk, coconut water,
Okay.
adding in an avocado,
Okay.
that can add your protein in, or a protein powder,
Mm-hmm.
and some berries, really good antioxidants, and some seeds, chia seeds, linseeds,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. Some Greek yogurt,
Okay.
again, that's really high in protein. Um, you might not be into that,
Yeah.
eggs, great
Yeah.
source of
Yeah.
protein.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the protein as well what kills the hunger as well, because the last thing you want to do is be hungry in the middle of an exam.
Exactly. So the protein will help you feel fuller for longer.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so just, making sure that you eat, and then also snacks, having some high quality snacks instead of going for the sugary stuff.
Mm.
Some nuts,
Yeah.
handful of nuts, really good. Maybe some peanut butter, fruit.
Yeah.
Um, just lots of things. But just again, we try and avoid the sugary or too much caffeine.
Yeah, the crash and burn.
Yes, I know myself, if I have too much caffeine, I get really jittery. My heart tends to elevate, so I almost feel like my heart's jumping out of my chest.
Yeah.
And if anybody suffers with anxiety or panic attacks, that physical feeling can actually bring on the sense of panic and anxiety.
Definitely, yeah. It's definitely not going to make things any better.
No. So by all means, have your coffee, but don't overdo it.
Yeah, and I find a mint tea is very good as well for settling the stomach as well before something like that.
Yeah, chamomile tea, ginger tea, really good for the stomach as well.
Yeah.
Another thing I'll say as well is try and avoid the negative Nellies.
Yes.
Stay away from negative people. They just drain your energy. The energy vampires, as I call them.
Yeah.
And when you're standing there waiting to go into the exam, and you've got these energy vampires around you, the Debbie Downers. Oh,
yes.
I haven't studied for this, or this is going to be terrible, and avoid them.
Yeah.
Please.
Another one I remember is the people who literally have the notes out until they go in the door.
Oh, gosh,
and would drop them. And I often on the day of exam, I would just kind of go away, isolate myself a little bit. Did not speak to too many people, one or two friends, because again, you don't want to be around the people who are going to stress you out.
No.
And leave the notes at home, I find. Yeah. I always say, except you're going to know what you're going to know by then.
That is it. That is it. And, maybe on the way in, just listen to something nice, listen to a good podcast, something that will just elevate the mood and try and bring you into that zone, that free flow state that we spoke about. That's where you want to be.
Exactly.
And just maybe on podcasts, there's a couple of really good podcasts around that I've listened to myself, and I find them really good. So we have got let me see, we've got 10% Happier.
Okay.
It's an American one. And that actually talks about meditation.
Okay.
It goes into, helps you understand it, how to begin the practice from scratch. Another one is the My Life podcast.
Right.
And that's hosted by the Irish comedian Jarlath Regan.
Right.
And there's lots of inspiring conversations around developing healthy habits to improve your overall well-being. He talks to lots of really interesting people, so it's a nice one to listen to. Another one is called Owning It, the Anxiety podcast.
Okay.
And that's by Irish author Caroline Foran. In each of the episodes, Caroline shares her own experience with anxiety and some tips and techniques that have helped her overcome it. There's some of the good ones.
Okay, so we'll be 10% Happier, My Life, and Owning It. And again, we'll maybe put the links to those underneath.
Yes.
This, and that's, much more positive to listen to something than that than somebody who's kind of
Debbie Downer in the corner,
catastrophizing about the whole thing. And I remember it well. Or another one that's important, I think, is after the exam. I used to just get away as fast as possible and don't do a post-mortem of the exam afterwards.
Do not do it.
I had a friend once who I remember, it was after a translation exam, and she had the dictionary out afterwards checking, did I get that? And I think we had to prise the dictionary out of her hands and say, leave it. Nothing, that's not going to help in any way.
No, there's nothing you can do about it. It's done. Put it to bed, move on. Give yourself an off day if you can. If you have an exam the next day back to back, just even give yourself a couple of hours, a little nana nap if you can.
Yeah.
just to refresh yourself before you start getting into the next wave of things.
Just to ask about that, what's the ideal time for a nap? Because that's often spoken about. If you go too long, you can get up groggy, or it's kind of quite short, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. I would say, even 20 minutes.
Yeah, yeah.
Even 20 minutes. If I have a nap, I like to put on a bit of a meditation,
Okay.
or one of those kind of sleep talks, and just helps relax me. And sometimes the voice of somebody can be quite hypnotic, and
Yes.
find yourself just zoning out, then
Yeah.
waking up with a bit of a start. I love when that happens. I know,
Yeah.
oh, I've had a bit of a nap there.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I know that, because if you leave it too long, you kind of go into the more deep sleep state, and then when you wake up from that, you're very groggy and you're
That's when you feel
very,
groggy.
yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
exactly. But it's really important to draw a line under the exam. Once you've done it, you've
yeah.
done it. Leave it, let it go, and move on to the next.
The next one, excellent. So, any other tips at that point, or are we done on that section?
I think maybe we can maybe talk or give a little bit of advice to family members
Yeah,
who
I
are
think that's important.
supporting.
And
Yeah,
you know that you mentioned as well, you have a daughter who's preparing exams at the moment.
yeah.
That'll be something I'll be facing in a few years, and I think a lot of people listening today will be experiencing that. So what parents do to kind of support their children in the lead up to exams?
Okay. So as a parent myself, Barry, I know I can get really stressed out, and taking on my own daughter's stress.
Mm,
But what's important to know is that if you're stressing as a parent, or as a partner, or whoever it is that's doing the exam,
yeah.
you often make the person more stressed,
Yes.
because they're
Yes.
reacting to how you present. So they, in a sense, are soaking up your energy.
Yeah.
So it's, as a support person, it's really important that you stand back and try and not get involved or fall into that flapping about and making
Mm,
things just more dramatic, let's say, or
yeah.
stressful than they need to be. Um, Asking the person, what can I do to support you?
Mm,
Maybe as a parent, it might be just being a little bit more lenient around things in the
yeah.
house.
Yeah. Yeah.
So your child might have a certain amount of chores to do. So it's maybe just backing off from them,
Mm, yeah.
leaving them as free as possible to focus on the things that are important, but just being reassuring towards them. It's also really important the place that we study in.
Yes. Yeah.
So you can just create a nice space and a nice environment that helps them to study,
Mm-hmm.
and also just helping them to have healthy anxiety,
Mm.
um, which is really important.
Can I just go back to what you said about creating a space? And one thing that I've heard a lot from students, especially the ones that come to the library, if they have other siblings, that it can be
Ah,
quite difficult to create that kind of calm space in a
yes.
household. And sometimes it might be a case of also getting the other siblings on board and saying, look, your brother
Of
and
course.
sister, is doing exams, so maybe we just might be a little bit more considerate.
Yeah, mindful of the
Noise.
noise
Yeah,
levels in the
yeah,
house, that kind of thing. And not everybody has the luxury of having their
no,
own space in the home. And that's where the libraries are great.
yeah,
No
definitely.
one, can underestimate the value of having a library to go to,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I mean,
where you have that calm environment where you can study.
that's it. And in Fingal, like I said, we've plenty of branches no matter where you live and around the country. So don't be afraid to go down to your local library and use the facility. I mean, it's there for you. It's your facility, and it's free. Not many
Yes,
things are free. So
exactly,
do use it.
exactly.
Do use it.
Yeah.
Just one thing I want to ask you about with parents there in particular. it can be tricky, can't it, to get that balance right, because you want your child to do well in the exam, and you want to encourage them, maybe push just a little bit to, for them to achieve their potential, but at the same time, you don't want to put too much pressure on. How do we get that balance right?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Barry. One thing to remember is that this is their journey, it's not yours. So it's recognizing that your child is an individual, they're separate to you.
Yeah.
And what you may want for them might not be what they're able to achieve, or what they might want for themselves.
Yeah.
So it's having good conversations with them, having healthy conversations. And also it's trying to find that balance where you're not putting too much pressure on them. You're still encouraging them to work hard and to do their best, but, just not putting and loading that pressure onto them.
Yeah, it is a real balancing act, isn't it? It's a tricky
It
one.
is, and it's being supportive, and letting them know that their best is their best.
That's it. And I have to say, my parents were very good at that. They always used to say to me, just do your best. Don't worry about after that. And then they never put pressure on me for results or anything. It was, if you've done your best, we're happy.
Yeah, it's
You know what I
being
mean?
good enough. It really is. And knowing that your grades or marks, they're not an indicator of how you are as a person.
Yes, absolutely.
And I keep saying there are many paths to the same destination.
Yeah.
And you might look at doing other courses after school, as a way of getting to where you want to end up.
That's it.
Even maybe taking that gap year after school.
Yeah.
Just to try and understand what it is that you want to do.
Yep, there's any number of routes out there. There really is, and I've done interviews in the past with there's one really inspiring young person called Amy, and we might maybe put the link to this under it. And she went a totally different route towards she ended up actually in social care herself. But her route there was just not what you would expect. As she said herself, I wasn't academic, just wasn't my thing, struggled a bit. But she's ended up being incredibly successful and very, very content person as well. So we might put a link to that under there, because it's a great story. Amy Collins is her name, actually. Great story. She told us a while back. So don't. When the results day comes, actually the results in Ireland, they were only out the other day, as we were recording this a few days ago. And some students will be delighted with how they did, and others will be disappointed. And it's important not to get too don't catastrophize. There's always a way. There's lots of different routes.
And don't compare yourself to other people. That's the other thing. You are your own individual person.
Yeah.
Comparing yourself, it takes away your joy.
Definitely.
Another thing is, Barry, that I deal with a lot of students who are from different ethnic backgrounds.
Right.
And culturally, some families can really put a lot of pressure on their children to perform academically. So they may have ideas around, I want my son to become an engineer, or my daughter to become a doctor.
Yeah.
When really their child just doesn't have that, let's say, academic capability. But their talents may lie in different areas. And I've had students who, a typical example might be that dad was an engineer, so son is expected to be an engineer. The son, A, doesn't want to be an engineer,
Yeah.
and B, doesn't have that, I suppose, way of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
They aren't maybe mathematically gifted.
Yeah.
So they don't kind of fall naturally into that way of studying. And the pressure is unreal, but
Yeah.
also how that is so debilitating to the person's self-esteem.
Yes. Yes.
And
Yes. Yes.
thinking, I'm letting my parents down if I don't do this. I'm going to be a disappointment. And
Yeah.
what I say to them is, you are your own person.
Mm.
Your parent is not the one who has to live your life.
Yeah.
You are that person. You need to honor your own vocation
Mm-hmm.
and what that might be. And I'll
Mm.
often open up a conversation with them, and this person may say, you know what, I really actually want to do fashion design.
Yeah.
So tell me about that. Let's
Yeah.
get excited about that. How
Yeah.
can we find a pathway into that?
Yeah. Yeah.
How can we have a conversation with your parent around that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's helping support them have a conversation, maybe with a parent who just isn't open to that,
Mm.
has a very set sense of
Yeah.
where they think they're
Yeah. And there can be a
going.
generational difference there as well, can't there? You
Absolutely,
know.
cultural, lots of different things.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so it's important that students find somebody who can be an advocate for them,
Mm-hmm.
somebody who can guide them. And that's where, the role of school guidance counselors or
Yes.
psychologists become really important.
Yeah, and we will. I'm going to cover that at some point because that is so important that the support is there, and in schools in Ireland now have a lot more support. I mean, when I was in school, we simply didn't have that. Whereas
No,
now
we
schools
didn't.
do have counselors and they have psychologists and they have great support there. There was just one thing I wanted to say before we move on. It was one of my pet peeves when it came to exams, and it was something that people did, not necessarily parents, it could be anybody, and they meant really well by this. But all it did was put on more pressure. And you've probably heard this. You'll be grand. You'll fly
Oh,
it. You'll
yeah.
fly it. I used to hate that because it just piled the pressure on them. And I know it comes from a
Absolutely.
good place,
It
but I'd
does.
say avoid
Yeah.
that. Do recognize that the person doing the exam is nervous, is maybe
Yes,
worried,
they are.
and say, yeah, do you
Um,
know what? That must be tough. That must be
yes.
tough. Just recognize it. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's hard, isn't it?
It is, and what you've said, Barry, it is a tough time. So lean into it with kindness.
Mm,
As a parent, show your child that you're there to support them. And as I said, it might be just taking some of the everyday tasks off them and bringing them some snacks, cups of tea,
yeah,
just reassuring with love and kindness.
yeah,
And the big thing is letting them know you love them no matter what.
that's it. Yeah,
Um, some
yeah.
people, they use the fear of failure as a motivator. But
Mm,
fear of failure, it's a really bad way of
yeah, yeah,
hoping to motivate somebody because it
yeah,
frightens them.
yeah,
And then the brain shuts down.
yeah,
They
definitely.
can't remember anything, they can't problem solve, and it has the complete
Yeah,
opposite effect.
yeah. So as you say, and you don't have to solve every problem either. It can be just a question of
No,
saying, you know what, look, and yeah, I know you're feeling a bit, and that's okay. Just the
yeah,
recognition alone can be enough. I think, yeah,
yes,
at least they see where I'm coming from here. And, as you said, it could be
mm,
bringing the cup to tea, maybe a few less household chores can make all the difference. I just want to move on now to something. And this is something I'm sure you've seen a lot in your role in the college. So far, we've talked about a kind of a typical school year. What about sometimes beyond our control, we can have events that can cause disruption and extra stress during a school or a college year? It could be family difficulties, could be a death, could be illness. What kind of things could we come across there?
sometimes I suppose what I've experienced with students is maybe parents splitting up.
Okay.
So just a family, huge family circumstances. So that can have also financial implications as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Our role, I guess, as parents is to protect our children as much as we can. And that's as much as we can.
Yeah.
Often, we can't.
Yeah.
And that's part of life. It's just trying to maintain, suppose, a calm environment as much as possible under the circumstances, not offloading onto our kids,
Yeah.
not seeing our kids as the counsellor. So holding back, maintaining that boundary.
Yeah.
And that can be really hard. Or, a parent losing a job.
Yeah.
Again, really, really stressful. But it's trying to minimize or let's say essentially it's damage control.
Yes.
So trying to keep those conversations to a minimum, particularly during exam times. We can't stop life. That's the unfortunate thing.
Yeah.
Worst case, there's been some really awful things that students have had to experience, and that can be a death in the family.
Yes.
Again, if possible, it's liaising in with the school or the college, letting them know what's going on and looking at what adaptations can be made.
That's what I was going to say next. Like, what can,
Yeah.
as you said, what can students in a difficult situation do? And I think it's important to let the school or college know.
Absolutely,
what's happening.
It is. So perhaps they can take the exam at a further stage, or at a later stage. A lot in colleges there are deferred exams that students can sit, or again assessments or assignments that are part of that marking system. Discussing it with teachers, lecturers, and getting some additional time.
Yeah, and you'll find that colleges do tend to be understanding. Only last semester, I got a really bad bout of COVID, knocked me out for about 5 weeks. And my college, I contacted the head of department, said, look, this is the situation. And they were very understanding, said, look, if you need a bit of extra time for your assignment, that's fine. In the end, I didn't need it, but it was nice to know the option was there. And you'll find they will be understanding with situations. So don't be afraid to speak up.
That's it. And it's about communicating, or, a relationship may break up just before exams. And that can be really overwhelming and distressing for the individual. So it can be seeing if you can speak to somebody at the college or school. Is there a psychologist or counsellor there that you can debrief with, that you can have a couple of sessions with just before you go into exam time? That gives you an opportunity to offload, so you're not carrying around that burden of grief. But also, if you need to go and see your doctor, some schools and colleges will require a medical note, and you need to get that has to, you can't look for it retrospectively. So making sure you have that in hand, and if needs be, worst case scenario, you might need to, maybe the doctor might see it fit that he prescribes you some medication just to help you manage at that time. It doesn't mean that it's long term, or just maybe something to help you sleep or to calm down.
Absolutely. And as we kind of come towards the end, I want to and we kind of touched on this already, the advice we might give students. So it's literally the evening before the exam. What really should we be doing, Daddy? We spoke about sleep already, and I mentioned I always think it's a good thing that 6 o'clock or whatever, that's it, have a cut-off point. And watch something maybe you like, read something, listen to a podcast, listen to some music, little bit of social media, not too much, have a chat with a friend or something. Is there anything else you might advise on that night before?
I really like that idea, Barry, of having a cut-off time, and then also having a bedtime, that right, I'm going to go to bed at 10 o'clock or whatever time it is. Acknowledging that you've done as much as you can.
Yeah.
At this point in time, cramming, we've looked at the science, it's not
Yeah.
going to work.
Yeah.
So giving yourself that grace, knowing that you have got your own back.
Yeah.
If you've put in the work, you're okay.
Yeah.
You will do it.
As somebody
So
used to
thinking
always say to me, the exam wasn't written on the moon. Like it's going to contain stuff,
it will, and you will surprise yourself how much what
Yes.
happened.
Yes.
But doing something nice for yourself, as you say, maybe having a nice dinner, having the chat, the cup of tea, with the family, having a bit of a laugh.
Yeah, I remember before I did my last interview, I actually did nothing the day before. Nothing.
Great.
I didn't look at any notes, and I went out to Carton House in Maynooth, went out with my camera early in the morning, out in nature for a few hours, fresh air,
Yes.
and it did me the world of good. And it also gave the time for that information to process as well, and to relax. And I went in the next day nervous, as you'd expected, but manageable and reasonably calm.
Yes.
And the information was still there. It was all there.
It will. You've got this. Being your own cheerleader, just champion yourself along. And, remember, at the end of the day, it's only an exam.
Yeah.
And I know that exam can be really important. However, there's always different opportunities, different paths, a chance to do it again. Just don't be so hard on yourself. Nothing is worth it, and nothing is worth your peace or your mental health.
Definitely, definitely. So I like that what you said, by the way, you've got this. I think that could be a great mantra for people to say to yourself, your affirmation, while you're studying, when you're going in, you've got this. It's positive, isn't it? It's just a little positive affirmation to put you in the right frame of mind. So maybe that's something we could all say to ourselves. So we spoke about the night before the exam, right? It's the day of the exam. We're outside. We said stay away from the negative Nellies and the Debbie Downers and the people who are frantically looking at notes right up until the last second. Stay away.
Stay away.
Okay. And then you go into the exam hall, you sit down. What next? What would you
breathe.
advise?
Remember to breathe.
Yeah.
That's the one thing that you want to do. Have your water with you and sip on your water throughout the exam. It's really important to keep yourself hydrated. Look at the questions that you have, time. So if you've got a 3-hour exam, and look at how many questions you have and just jot down roughly how many minutes you have per, to do each question.
Yeah.
Generally, I would start with the most difficult.
Okay.
Jot down your notes, do that. Read the question thoroughly. As you're reading, just maybe mark out some keywords or phrases in the question. Anything that comes to mind, write it down in your notes, just there on the side. And then begin to tackle I hate that word, methodologically.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
You know what I mean.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
Do it. Calm, confident, assertive.
Could it be an idea for some people, if your confidence is a bit struggling, to maybe start with something you do know quite well to just get the confidence up?
Yep. Exactly. So we can look at that other method that we'd spoken about earlier, where you're doing the one that's easy, so you're getting the momentum. Yeah. And that confidence.
So it depends on the person, the situation, really, what way you want to go for that. And it might work one way in one exam and another in another. So maybe it's something to think about before the exam. If it's a subject maybe you struggle with, maybe that's the one to say, I'll start with something I know quite well. Get the confidence up.
Get the confidence up and get into the momentum and the rhythm. and then just go through it. And often, if you finish the easier questions, you're giving yourself a little bit more time then to tackle the more difficult ones. But it is important to give yourself an equal amount of time initially for each question. Whatever you have left then is surplus, and you can add it to the ones that you're struggling with.
Yeah, and then maybe a subject that you're strong in, maybe that one you might start with the more tricky one. So again, it depends really.
It's important to know yourself and your style and what works for you.
And don't be afraid to like speak up during the exam. If there's something that's distracting you, say it to the examiner. If there's noise or something. I remember two people, examiners, had a conversation right next to me.
Oh.
And it took me about 10 minutes to pluck up the courage to turn around and say, do you mind?
Yes.
And don't be afraid to speak up if there's a distraction.
Yeah, of course. And then some students that have difficulty with focus, they may be allowed bring in noise cancelling headphones.
Okay.
So that's something to ask about.
Right.
Yeah.
Definitely. And another thing is, I find sometimes an exam hall can be quite an unfamiliar location, and it can be intimidating. You go in, you're used to being in a kind of a small classroom or whatever, and suddenly you go into this big hall and there's rows and rows of desks, and that can be quite intimidating. And I often say, if at all you can get into the room in the days preceding just to take a look at it, just to be familiar. Yeah, this is the layout. Oh, that's where my desk is. Okay, and just maybe a little bit of a less of a shock to the system.
Exactly. And to know, maybe even printing up the exam timetable where everyone in the house can see it. So everyone knows that, if you're on tender hooks or you're a little bit snappy, they know why. But also it can be, what day it's on. So you're not going to get it mixed up.
Yeah, definitely. And we do that at the library. We put up the timetables for ourselves as well. And it means we can just have a chat and say, oh, English today, is it? How do you feel about that? Are you that type of thing? And I think the students appreciate a little bit of a chat like that. And I always give them the advice about the sleep and that as well. And, so listen, that's in the exam itself. Okay. Then we've already kind of mentioned the after exam. We've already mentioned it, avoiding the post-mortem. Oh God, what did you get? Don't do that. Just get out of there, is what I say.
Yes.
Get out of there.
Get out. Go home.
Yeah.
Go somewhere nice and give yourself a reward.
Exactly. Definitely, without a doubt. And then the next one I want to talk about is, again, so usually a few weeks or maybe a month or two later is the results day itself. And that can be a very stressful day for students and for parents, I think, as well. Any advice for that day itself? How can we mind ourselves?
Okay, so it's not, really it's about staying in the present, not anticipating it too much, because you don't really know. You may have a general idea of how you're going to do, but it's, again, not catastrophizing, painting the worst case scenario. It is what it is, and there has to be a certain amount of acceptance in that.
Yeah.
Again, family and friends, those around you, not being just mindful of the pressure that they might put on the person.
Even unintentionally. As I said, the whole, oh, you'll be fine, you'll fly it. It comes from a good place.
Yeah, it is what it is.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot you can do about it.
Yeah.
And also it's giving the person space to receive and absorb the results themselves.
Yeah.
And letting them decide when the time is that they might want to share that result with you.
Yeah, and I remember my mom being very good at that, actually. I always remember in college, I think I was still in bed, and she literally had the envelope in her hand. She came in, handed it to me, and left the room. And I really appreciated that, because it gave me 5 minutes to look at it myself, process it myself, and good or bad, and I appreciated that. And I think that's
Yeah.
something we can, maybe do. Give
Mm.
the person a few minutes to have it, because it's kind of a personal moment as well, isn't it?
It really is. Yeah. And if it's not the result that you wanted or hoped for, you might not want to share that. You just might need a bit of time.
Mm. Yeah,
So it's just respecting that.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
definitely.
yeah,
And we've
and
already gone into a little bit of the details of what to do if it maybe isn't what you expected, about not to catastrophize, and there have been lots of different routes. And your school as well will have a career advisor and counsellors in your college who can help guide you
of
in that.
course. Yeah,
At
that's
those
true.
different routes. And in Ireland, I know some people do like a post-leaving cert course that can then lead into a diploma or degree course that they wanted, or
Yeah,
so there's any number of different routes
plenty of
to
bridging
do
options.
that. Absolutely. And kind of the very last thing I want to talk about, we've really got so much covered in this today, haven't we? I mean,
We
wow,
have.
a
It's been
huge
great.
amount. So specific scenario, and we have the vast majority of students we have coming into the library are secondary level students doing their leaving certificate, and that move from second level to third level can be very daunting. And for some people, it's maybe living away from home for the first time, and your learning is a bit more independent, that maybe your professors, teachers are not as so much on top of you as before.
Yes,
It's like, there's the stuff, learn it if you want, not my problem if you don't. It's a bit more,
exactly.
it's a big change. And what can students do, and maybe parents of students do, to maybe help prepare for that change?
Okay. Well, I think as a parent, it's perhaps fostering a sense of independence in your child.
Yeah,
So particularly if they're, moving away, they're going to college in a different part of the country or overseas, it's just making sure that they have the basic skills of living
yeah,
and being able to manage money and being able to manage time.
yes, yes,
Um, Basic things, even down to cooking, laundry.
yeah,
I've come across students who didn't know how to turn on a washing machine,
right,
um,
okay,
or didn't know how to cook. So it's just imparting those everyday
yeah,
skills onto your child.
yeah,
And that takes away a lot of stress,
yeah.
because, living away is huge.
And you
So
and you
trying
learn
to,
so much as well by that experience, not just academics. You
yes,
learn
of
so much
course.
about life and how to manage
Yeah,
yourself. And I mean, I remember my first time I ever lived away from home was in France, and it was quite a shock, because suddenly
yeah,
I was in this strange town where people spoke a different language, and I got a big shock that I realized my French wasn't as good as I thought it was, and they spoke with a really thick regional accent down in the south of France. And I remember on my first day, I went out to buy my basics, like, shampoo and toothpaste, and I hadn't a clue what I was doing. And I went to like a chemist and paid a fortune for like
yeah.
medicated shampoo and like the best. And then I realized, of course, there was like a supermarket around the corner. I could have got it for like a quarter of the price. But you know what? It was a
Yeah,
learning experience.
it
And
is.
it
Um,
turned out to be a great experience in the end. And it can be for all students as well. That first taste of independence can be brilliant.
it can be, certainly. Um, I remember myself when I finished school, so just after 6 year, I felt I felt really scared.
Yeah.
I'd come from the security of school, being in the same school
Yeah.
from the age of 4 up until 17.
Yeah.
Now I was out of that security blanket. So it can be really terrifying.
Definitely.
At the time, I remember not being able to verbalize that, not
Mm.
really having anybody to talk to about that fear and anxiety that I had. So it's just preparing yourself for that. And parents also recognizing it's the end of an era for you
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah. It is. It is. Yeah.
You've been involved perhaps with that school for years. all the other parents, all the other students. So it's now you're going into a different phase of life. It's exciting and it's daunting. So it's welcoming all aspects of that. Preparation. Also acknowledging that feelings will come up. They can be transitory. They will come and go. It's recognizing that and that it's okay. It's okay to feel afraid. It's okay to feel scared, vulnerable, all of that.
Absolutely.
It's part of life. And this is probably one of the biggest things for anybody leaving school. You're entering into a new era of your life. You don't have that safety blanket, that security anymore.
Especially if you're living away from home. That can be a big thing.
Exactly.
And I think what you said is really important, to make sure young people are equipped with the basic skills, as you said, doing the laundry, cooking good nutritious food. Students aren't exactly known for their healthy diets.
Exactly.
I certainly,
noodles.
I remember it well, definitely. So to make sure you're doing all that stuff and looking after yourself, could be managing money for the first time. You might have bills to pay.
Or having a part-time job and studying as well.
Yeah. And I did that, and that came with its challenges as well, trying to manage time. But it's also, I will say, it's also a very exciting time.
It is.
You meet new people. You meet people from all over Ireland or different countries, and you often make friends you keep. It can be a really positive, exciting time, and often at that point you're studying something that you genuinely like. Most of the time you've picked this is something you want to do.
That's an excellent point.
It's different, and I've said, college exams they can be stressful, but I think the Leaving Cert, nearly, when you've 7 completely different subjects, it is really tough going, whereas at least in college your subjects are in or around the same area.
And as you said, you've chosen them. They're ones that you want. And again, Barry, I don't have nightmares about any of the exams I faced in college.
Yes, interestingly,
I only have the Leaving Cert.
Same.
Nightmare.
Isn't that interesting?
It is.
It is, definitely.
But I think to conclude, Barry, me and you have both lived to tell the tale.
Yep, absolutely.
And we didn't have the supports, I guess, that are there for young people now.
Exactly. And you know what?
Avail of them.
And sometimes, and this, you mentioned this at the very beginning, I know this, sometimes you change direction as well. Sometimes you might go down and you say, do you know what? Maybe this isn't working. Maybe I'll go in a different direction. And I did that in my life. And I know you've done that. So,
you and me both,
and that's okay. That's okay. Sometimes you go down a road and think, I've tried this, but it could be in college you'll discover it. Yeah, this maybe I might need to change here. It's not working. Exactly. And that's okay. It happens. It's okay.
It does.
So I think that's a good place to finish.
It's a good end note.
Yeah, and listen, thank you so much for joining us.
It's been a pleasure, Barry. An absolute pleasure.
Definitely.
Thank you for having me on this.
Absolutely. And this is the first in a series, so we'll be covering lots of other topics in the weeks that follow. And these will be put out on the Fingal Libraries podcast, on YouTube, and Phoenix FM out in Dublin 15 are going to be syndicating them as well and broadcasting. So if you're listening to us from Phoenix FM, a very special welcome and many thanks to Phoenix for putting these out, and we really hope they'll help as many people as possible.
Yes, and if anybody has any suggestions for any other topics that you'd like myself and Barry to cover, just feel free to let us know.
Absolutely.
We're more than happy to help out and be there.
And this mental health series, we plan to continue it into 2024. It's a really important initiative, and So yeah, if you have any ideas or something you'd like covered, let us know.
Thank you, Barry, and thanks to all the listeners as well.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.